How's my
So
sound coming through for you, Rob?
it's all good, mate. Yeah,
Yeah,
how's mine?
yeah, it's
Lovely,
good. Yeah, really good. Yeah.
crystal.
Looks like you've got an industrial sized mic there. So,
I did spend £12 on this microphone,
oh,
so it's all good. But Steve, thank you so much for joining the podcast today. How you doing?
yeah, I'm doing really well. Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Good. Well, as ever, we part of this new kind of incorporated podcast we do called Legal Tech 101 is we previously did one talking to lawyers, which was great, but now seems to be a continuous lasered focus on legal technology, how it can enable lawyers both private and in-house, and obviously Relativity, I'd probably say is one of the OGs, right?
Andrew Sager, our founder,
Mm.
was obviously involved prior to that as well, but kind of, yeah, 17 plus years.
And how did Relativity come around? What was the kind of the inception of product?
Yeah, so Andrew had started a consulting business building
Okay.
software to kind of software to order, really. So set off in that as a trained computer engineer, and then with that kind of came up with this concept working on behalf of a law firm in the US for like document management. Turn of the century was just all kind of all coming through there, moving from a hard copy into electronic.
Yeah.
And yeah, kind of found the early stages of what would later become K-Cura, later become Relativity, and then took it out to market again like some years ago now.
So interesting, right? Because my first job, I worked in M&A data rooms. So and that kind of, I think, as we see kind of in the verticals of legal technology, they all kind of are similar but very different.
Yeah,
So for example, when I was working in M&A data rooms, it's kind of that conversion from prospectuses and documents and lever arch files, digitization into a place for due diligence. Obviously, Relativity is kind of on the other side of that from a litigation standpoint, right?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think kind of like our key staples now, like organizing data, discovering the truth, and acting on it. We didn't call it then. That was kind of a latter day line that was added in. But effectively,
Yeah.
that was the use case and the problem. There was tons of data, disparate data sources, lawyers wanting to efficiently review those growing volumes of data. So Andrew created like an amazing piece of software for that, which is then kind of gone on and on from that.
Nice. That's very cool. So how, like, we all get into this in weird and wonderful worlds, right? So for my sins, I was an estate agent, just that way. So don't tell anyone that. But so how did you get into legal tech?
Yeah, so I think like most that I've met in this industry, there's if you go back 15 plus years ago, it hadn't really made it through to universities, colleges,
Mm.
educational path. It's still really only just getting there now as well. But yeah, so complete impromptu meeting. I was on holiday in the Bahamas. I was in a swimming pool.
Nice.
Met up with an Australian guy called Chris O'Reilly, who owned a business called LDM Global.
Yeah.
Me and Chris got talking, and then some months after that, kind of ended up joining LDM Global. So I was at Toshiba before, very structured, large
Yeah.
organization. I was on their kind of like IT hardware side of their business, and yeah, I'd never heard of the words eDiscovery. Was
No.
intrigued,
Yeah.
did some due diligence. Went to legal tech as it was called back then, as part of kind of me flirting with the industry. And yeah, just it was super enticing, very, very different to large structured, large volume, kind of large corporate business like Toshiba was. And
Yeah.
took the plunge and kind of took a risk and moved over, and haven't regretted a single day.
It's really interesting you say that because like we almost call them like blue chip corporations, right? Who have a very structured sales process, very structured education to sales process. So like the Gartners, IBMs, the Shebas. How did you like? It's a bit of sink or swim sort of scenario, right? Because like I speak to some people who come from that background, get dropped into an entrepreneurial environment, and they're like, oh my god. So like, how did you just naturally have that entrepreneurial instinct to be able to pick up and go, or did you find it like quite a stressful thing to start with? Like, how did you feel about it?
I'd say in hindsight, kind of a little bit of both, and
Yeah.
also probably some naivety in terms of like going into it and what to expect. So I think I settled into it pretty well, but it was, it was very it's a rude awakening in the differences of it. But kind of like fundamentally, that was one of the main reasons I wanted to come into the space. And like at that stage of my career where I thought I could add some value. I think kind of like going to legal tech and looking into the space, it was back then, it's not anymore. It was the Wild West a little bit. And it's I think for me with my structures, like, great, if I can apply some of this structure and detail to making changes that make very small percentage change in a large, huge multinational.
Yeah.
And hopefully some of those seemingly small changes here could make bigger percentage difference changes in the eDiscovery space. So yeah, no, it was definitely a lot of lessons learned and great foundation as well.
So if we like accelerate, right? So we went from kind of on-prem heavy duty technology, then we kind of had the birth of cloud, right? And Rel 1. When would Rel 1 officially roll out? And what year was that?
Officially, I think we're just coming up to our 5th year now.
Fifth year.
So it's been out there for some time. In terms of, sorry, that's my dog in the background.
Right,
in terms of the inception of it, obviously, like prior to that. But yeah, we've been out for a good number of years now.
Yeah. Okay. Because I suppose my question is, like, obviously the pivot from, say, on-prem heavy databases to Rel 1 cloud first, have you seen like an acceleration in adoption because of that? How have you seen kind of a change in behavior with regards to that pivot from Relativity?
Yeah, so I'd say there's like a macro level and kind of like an our industry level. So at a macro level, we all know from the hundreds of apps that we use and the adverts and kind of the big superpowers out there like Microsoft and others, they're driving at a macro level this mass move towards like cloud enabled kind of technology. So we are a part of that for sure. I think what we see in our space then, because like the types of data that we're dealing with tend to be more sensitive than someone using email domestically for
photos or whatever, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think things like like the move to Office 365 for many large multinationals, corporations, certainly the highly litigious, highly regulated, which are those that we both mainly deal with in our space.
Yeah,
that's happened at pace and continues to move at pace now. Very different in each individual country based on their levels of cloud adoption, but the big markets like the UK, the US, Australia, continental European large countries, that adoption is happening at pace. So we're going along with that, and that's creating more acceptance and more openness to saying, okay, well, why if we're putting our email, other kind of technologies in there, why wouldn't we also use it for eDiscovery and other kind of levels of hosting them? So there's been that for sure. Then you bring it back to kind of like our space, the volumes of data that we're dealing with, the complexities of dealing with those large volumes of data and the infrastructure that you need to run as a business. Again, it's acting as an enabler through that.
Completely. I think it's that kind of cloud accelerant as well. I think it's also helped with like the incarnation and creation of new job roles within firms, right? So like when we started this game like a decade ago, there wasn't really legal operations, there wasn't really data scientists, there wasn't really BAs, right? Which are now well-trodden paths in law firms, which is super interesting, right? Because again, I was speaking to a lady this afternoon, and she was just talking about how lots of people go through law school, realize they want to be a lawyer, but want to be in the legal ecosystem. So like, especially in your teams, do you have a lot of kind of legal background people come into Relativity just from a technology standpoint, or what's the kind of the makeup of the business?
We do, real mixed bag. So, we obviously as a software innovation company, the highest percentage of our employees are developers, engineers, programmers who are building the future Relativity and looking after kind of the current Relativity. So I think with that, outside of that in roles like legal, like customer success, like sales, we have, again, like as you've experienced, and going back to how we were talking about our entry into this space, it's an eclectic mix of backgrounds. There's some legal, some technology, some pure customer success, and then others who we've seen come from like teaching backgrounds and be super successful in this space. So we certainly see some of that. I think if you have that, it's a distinct advantage, or at least the ability and like the passion to learn
Yeah,
some of it, because we're so heavily governed by the legal frameworks, the regulations that are coming through. So I think if you have a basic grasp of that, it certainly helps in most roles.
interesting. Yeah, it's like a great example, right? So like my wife runs a legal tech recruitment company, and a lot of the people that they place into law firms now are in non-lawyer roles, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
like, for
Yeah.
example, they had a legal, well, she was she trained as a lawyer, didn't want to be a lawyer, then she went into sales. So this law firm actually hired her as a salesperson. So it's just like this weird ecosystem of intelligent collective people. So it's cool.
Yeah.
It's cool.
Yeah. I'd say as well, kind of like the for want of better terminology, like status of eDiscovery and that whole process within the legal ecosystem has increased and increased as the years gone by, because it's seen as, it's like not just the necessary evil. In some cases, it's kind of a differentiator for you as a business if you've got a solid eDiscovery practice,
Yeah, sure.
or you have solid partnerships with your service provider community to be able to deliver it. At a corporate level, they're demanding of their law firms and their service providers that, this is a cost to us. This is something that we need you to excel at. So the levels that are in there, and also some of the titles we've seen evolve over the years. So like a partner of eDiscovery didn't really exist when I
No.
entered this space.
Mm-hmm.
Full profit centers within law firms for eDiscovery is pretty much not far off a norm now, and it's kind of, that's a really evolved over the years from being a cost and a pass through to now like a real business and a differentiator within those firms.
Yeah, like I remember when I first got into eDiscovery, I was speaking to a partner, and then they realized how much it was costing. They're like, we probably should do this.
Yeah.
So it's yeah, it's a really interesting model. So where so obviously now Relativity is kind of cloud focused. What's kind of the next evolution for the platform, right? Because I assume you guys have ambitions kind of further flung than just linear eDiscovery itself, right?
So, eDiscovery, eDisclosure is a really, really big space. So our laser beam focus is to meet that use case.
Yeah.
That's our core focus, and we tend not to stray too far away at this juncture from that core focus. So, but there is a lot to do in terms of, one, making that better, making it faster, then also looking at some of the close adjacencies to it, but again within the same focus area. So we've we have a product in contracts, for example, relativity contracts.
Yeah.
We've acquired a company called TextIQ a few years back now to again really push on the AI side and PII, data breach, etc. So there are these like close adjacencies that kind of we can expand out into, but very much it's the legal buyer, it's the legal use case, it's eDiscovery as its core use, and certainly then the close adjacencies to it.
Makes sense. So what's the next plan for you then, mate? What's the world of the future look like for Mr. Steve Cooling?
Well, personally or professionally?
Either, right? What's the plan?
Yes, I'll give you a little bit of both. So kind of pretty much hot off the press. After 11 years so I was the first ever hire outside of North America for Relativity to come in and grow international, rest of world outside of kind of North America. So for the last 11 years, I've had the honor and the privilege of kind of going around the world, trying to kind of help support a mature eDiscovery market, seeing where the next location is for Relativity and Relativity One. That's been across EMEA and APAC now for like the last 11 years. In June of this year, I'm actually changing roles, and I've been again given the privilege to move to the US. I'm going to be moving to Chicago, where our global headquarters are. I'm going to take on a role of VP of North American Sales to lead our business for sales in North America, reporting into our Chief Sales Officer, Peter Kim, who I report into today. So yes, a big geographic change coming up for me. Super excited for it, and leaving the EMEA business and the APAC business in really good hands. About 2.5 years ago, we brought in an APAC MD called Georgia Foster, who is awesome, an incredible professional, amazing human being. The EMEA kind of community, our teams there I'm gonna love working with her. For those who haven't had the experience of doing that to date, so she's moving her family over as of the beginning of June.
Yeah,
I go
nice.
to North America. And then personally, I'm expecting, after somewhat of a gap since
Hiatus, right?
yeah, a hiatus since my daughter was born, who's currently at university, which to give you an age
Well,
gap bridge.
oh, okay.
So yeah, we're expecting in September. My wife is from Chicago, so to an
Okay.
extent, moving back. But yeah, we're off to
Congrats,
the
man.
US, and I'm off into a new US role. So super excited for
Very
one, my
cool.
next adventure, and two, Georgia and the team in EMEA, and like the future of that business, which is in really good shape. She's going to continue to manage APAC as well.
Okay. I was going to say, is it like a kind of a domino effect, or is it kind of just an amalgamations of roles being shifted sort of thing?
No, she'll take on the role of VP of sales for EMEA and APAC, which is
Yep.
a role that I did 2 or 3 years ago. We'll also be MD for EMEA at the same time as well. So yeah.
Wicked. So more importantly, is your missus excited about going home?
Yes and no.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay.
she lives in England, like
Sure.
it's
Seasons, right?
yeah, seasons. There's a coronation coming up next
Yeah.
week. He still, gets a kick and a giggle out of kind of eating things like crumpets and
Love it.
coming up with new terminology. So no, she's going to be pleased to be back closer to her family, and she loves Chicago. She loved kind of being there, up until she moved here a good few years back now.
Okay.
So no, pleased to go home, but we'll fondly miss the Buckinghamshire countryside and all of the cute things that England offered to her. So no, but we'll be back regularly anyway.
Yeah. Well, I think once you've experienced a Chicago winter, you might be back quicker than you think, right? I hear
Yeah,
it's pretty cold.
yeah. I've been to Chicago probably the best part of 70 times over the last kind of
I
15
imagine.
years.
Yeah.
So know it well, but yeah, the winters are tough for sure.
Well, congrats, man. Like,
Thank you. Yeah,
it,
thank you.
it sounds like you probably need to get there sooner rather than later before people stop letting your wife fly transatlantic, right? So.
Yeah, well, definitely. We're moving over the start of June, but
Okay.
either way, she needs to be there before the end of June for those purposes for sure.
Well, that's it, Steve. Thanks so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it too. And good luck. Good luck with the future of these as well. I think it's a great thing that you're doing.
Thank you very much, sir. Speak to you later. Bye.
Cheers. Take care.